Everyone screamed affair and missed the most obvious truth because it wasn't scandalous enough. Ted asking Shanice whether they were friends was an ambitious question, considering her outfit practically filed the paperwork. A dress reading friends, lovers, and more is not subtlety. It is a billboard with a pulse. And Shanice's answer, friends for now, landed exactly as intended. Polite, precise, and just threatening enough to remind him that whatever game he thinks he's playing, she already wrote the rules. Naturally, Ted looked intimidated. That was not confusion. That was the dawning realization that Shanice is not a cute detour in his storyline. She is the storyline. Get ready is not encouragement. It is a warning delivered in heels. Meanwhile, the episode decided to do something rare. Reward patience instead of paranoia. Vernon's performance was, by any reasonable standard, a full-scale emotional ambush. Never Can Say Goodbye was not merely a song choice. It was a calculated strike to the heart, aimed directly at Anita. The result was predictable: tears, devastation, and the kind of silence that only happens when a scene actually earns its sentiment. The man sang like someone carrying love, fear, and hope in the same breath, because that is exactly what it was. And then, as if the episode wanted to cleanse the air of every melodramatic accusation that's been choking the room, the truth finally walked in. Vernon was not having an affair. He was taking singing lessons from Sharon. Yes, singing lessons. The scandal was musical education. The great betrayal was vocal training. The narrative evidence for cheating collapsed into its natural state. Gossip dressed up as certainty. Of course, the people most committed to the affair theory will now have to find a new obsession. That should not be difficult. There is always another bandwagon waiting. Sharon's role in all this was quietly pivotal. The line, "You can never get rid of us," was delivered with just enough confidence to sound like affection and just enough edge to sound like a promise. Nicole's response, "Is that a warning?" was the correct interpretation, and also the funniest possible one. Nicole continues to be the person most capable of cutting tension without dulling the moment. The shade is effortless, the timing is surgical. And for those who insisted Vernon must have been cheating because he couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, the episode offered an answer so obvious it almost feels cruel. When someone suddenly improves, sometimes it means they practiced. Not everything is a rendezvous. Sometimes it's rehearsal. Even the so-called clues that fueled the accusations, Sharon's facial expressions, her body language, now read less like seduction and more like the concentration of a teacher watching a student struggle through a scale. The scandal was never in the facts. It was in the projection. Ted, unfortunately, chose this exact moment to demonstrate why silence is a life skill. He listened to Leslie, bought into the madness, and managed to embarrass himself in advance. There is a particular kind of irony in watching someone jump the gun when the gun was never loaded. He did not just shoot himself in the foot, he drafted the incident report. And Leslie? Leslie saw Shanice going to Ted's hotel room, because of course she did. The episode did not even pretend this information would be processed maturely. Instead, it tees up the next move. Leslie approaching Joey with a proposition. The specifics are still under wraps, but the pattern is familiar. When Leslie can't control a situation, she tries to monetize it. Socially, emotionally, strategically. Expect leverage. Expect manipulation. Expect an attempt to reframe someone else's business as her personal project. In the middle of all this mess, the episode also remembered something that actually matters. Anita'S cancer, the emotional weight of Vernon singing to her, doesn't just sit in the moment, it stretches forward into what they are facing. It deepens the meaning of the gathering, turns a family scene into a vow, and reminds everyone watching that this is not simply drama for sport. This is a relationship trying to survive something that does not care about plot lines, which makes the earlier accusations even more absurd. While some people were busy inventing an affair, Vernon was building a gift. While the room was filling with suspicion, he was preparing something tender. The cat out of the bag moment did not reveal betrayal. It revealed intention. And perhaps the most satisfying detail, Nicole and Danny didn't get the chance to ruin it. There are episodes where chaos wins by sheer persistence. This one refused. It allowed beauty to stand uninterrupted, and it let the emotional payoff land without being undercut by petty sabotage. So yes, the cheating allegation got cleared up, because it was always flimsy. Vernon showcased his talent, because he can. Sharon proved herself a real friend, because she was. Ted looked foolish, because he earned it. Leslie is plotting, because she cannot help herself. And Shanice? Shanice remains exactly what Ted seemed to realize too late. Not a question mark, not a side note, and certainly not just a friend. She is the kind of presence that makes people choose their words carefully, if they have any sense at all. Stop calling it a feel-good Christmas episode. This show just slid a cancer storyline under the tree and dared everyone to keep smiling. Vernon's grand holiday surprise arrives with the subtlety of a chandelier drop, a full-throated rendition of Never Can Say Goodbye, and delivered as though the season's purpose were to test how many tears an audience can produce before dessert. The performance lands precisely because it is not merely sentimental decoration. It is a neatly weaponized flex. The man sings the very song he wrote. Yes, the Clifton Davis connection is not a trivia footnote, but the point. And the show wisely lets that meta moment do the heavy lifting. A character serenades his wife, while the actor quietly reminds everyone that this hit was his before it was anyone else's, famously recorded by the Jackson 5 after being written with other Motown intentions. It is difficult to overstate how efficiently that single choice turns a standard holiday episode into something like an event. Heartfelt on the surface, expertly calibrated underneath. Naturally, the same audience that could barely keep its composure during the singing had recently been prepared to hold a full tribunal over Vernon's supposed infidelity, because nothing says festive like a marriage trial based on whispers, suspicious meetings, and the eager conviction that a man speaking to another woman must be conducting an affair. The reveal that the meetings with Sharon were about voice lessons, not romance, arrives as both explanation and indictment. The plot twist is not that Vernon was innocent, it is that so many were prepared to sentence him without evidence, then act surprised when reality had the nerve to be mundane. The episode's emotional climax doubles as a formal invitation to issue apologies, preferably without theatrics, as the facts have already done the embarrassing work. And yet, the show does not let the exoneration simply sit there looking pretty. It uses the moment to underline the collateral damage of rumor, particularly when meddling family members hover around a marriage like self-appointed investigators. Those daughters and their enthusiasm for inserting themselves into private matters are not framed as concerned. They are framed as disruptive, which is the charitable interpretation. Even Ted Richardson is dragged into the mess, serving as a cautionary example of what happens when a person treats hearsay as verified reporting. The lesson is not subtle. Believing everything heard is how reputations get scorched and households implode, all in the name of just asking questions. If the week's standout scene is Vernon's serenade, the week's other headline is less glossy and far more consequential. Anita'S cancer diagnosis, moving from looming possibility to full storyline. The tonal shift is deliberate, and the emotional whiplash is the point. Holiday warmth and communal uplift are positioned right beside the reality of treatment, fear, and the long road ahead. The inclusion of cancer-related messaging and treatment advertising around the episode reads as an awareness push as much as a plot device, and the narrative makes it clear that the coming episodes will not be content with shallow seasonal comfort. The story is preparing to demand endurance, on-screen and off. Meanwhile, the show keeps its reality television instincts sharp by sprinkling romantic chaos where it knows it will hit. Shanice and Ted manage to inject a jolt of excitement with a kiss that refuses to be ignored, the kind of moment that turns a living room into a voting booth. Dana's visible displeasure provides the necessary counterweight. No romance on a soap-adjacent drama is allowed to proceed without someone nearby smoldering. Nicole nearly earns an episode-long humiliation before the truth arrives in time to spare her, which is less an act of mercy than a reminder that impulsive accusations have consequences. And then there is Leslie, delivering the perennial delusion of entitlement, staking a claim over a man who was married at the time of introduction, as though chronology is merely an opinion. The appropriate response is not debate, it is a firm re-entry into reality. Credit is due where it is clearly engineered. The writers resist the lazy route of turning Vernon into yet another predictable betrayal arc, and the relief is palpable. The storyline does more than protect one character's integrity. It pushes back against the exhausting assumption that faithfulness is a fictional concept, particularly when it comes to black men on screen. That choice matters, and it lands even harder because the show dares to make the alternative. Voice lessons, love, and a public tribute feel dramatically satisfying instead of boring. The result is a pair of episodes that play like the best kind of holiday programming. Emotionally indulgent, yes, but also disciplined. Laughter and warmth are present. Nostalgia is deployed with precision, and the tears arrive on cue. First from a song that carries both narrative and real-world history, then from a diagnosis that refuses to let the season stay light. With next week already positioned as another escalation, the message is clear. Enjoy the singing while it lasts, because the story is about to trade carols for chemotherapy, and it intends to make every viewer feel the weight of that transition. The cheating scandal was never the story. The real problem was how easily everyone wanted it to be. Watching the latest episode required one small miracle: the public finally abandoning the breathless conviction that Vernon was staging an affair. The rumor mill, having sprinted directly past evidence and landed squarely in melodrama, can now do the difficult work of acknowledging what was plainly telegraphed all along. No cheating, no clandestine romance, just a man sneaking around for the most scandalous reason imaginable, planning a gift for Anita. The grand reveal, Vernon taking singing lessons from Sharon, arrives like a corrective slap to the season's most overwrought conspiracy theory. The hints were hardly subtle: repeated jokes about Vernon not being able to sing, the steady drip of suspicious timing, and the kind of narrative emphasis that practically screams, "This is a setup." And yes, it helps that the actor behind Vernon is a legitimate singer with real stage credentials, including Broadway work. The show was not building toward adultery, it was building toward a performance. Imagine that. Character development instead of character assassination. What lands best is not merely the explanation, but the emotional relief it provides. Vernon emerges as the rare reality TV-adjacent husband figure who is permitted, against all odds, to be a stand-up man. The implications refreshingly unfashionable. Not all men cheat, and not every secret is a sin. In a genre addicted to rinse and repeat infidelity arcs, the decision to put the cheating narrative to rest feels less like a plot twist and more like basic hygiene. The alternative, turning Vernon into a serial philanderer in the mold of perpetual affair patriarchs, would have been the lazy route. This episode chooses restraint, and the bar remains low enough that it still feels like a triumph. Of course, no reveal is complete without someone trying to detonate it prematurely, and Nicole appears determined to audition for the role of human spoiler alert. The impulse to rush in, loudly and publicly, with information that may not even be true, is not urgency. It is childish chaos dressed up as concern. The obvious solution, pulling her father aside and asking privately what was happening with Sharon before igniting a family crisis, never seems to occur. That choice explains far more than the immediate storyline. It also casts a harsh light on how Nicole and Ted ever functioned as a couple. This is what happens when conclusions are treated as facts and volume is mistaken for clarity. Meanwhile, the episode still finds room for spectacle and sentiment. Shanice, unmistakably, looks extraordinary. One of those moments where wardrobe does the heavy lifting and the camera knows it. The confidence, the presentation, the sheer visual punctuation. The scene practically instructs the room to pay attention. The tone shifts from suspicion to celebration with the ease of a show that understands how to pace a holiday episode. And credit where it is due, the writers deliver an elegant emotional hook with the Christmas ornament, and the storyline involving Tyrell forgiving June lands with genuine force. The family's ability to pull tears out of the audience is not accidental. It's a deliberate use of tradition, reconciliation, and seasonal vulnerability. The Dupree family, in particular, continues to operate as the show's emotional engine, capable of pivoting from tension to tenderness without losing the thread. In the middle of this scripted turbulence, one point resonates beyond plot mechanics. When a character like Anita is going through something heavy, support is not about theatrics, it's about presence. Vernon will be there, unquestionably, but grief can make even dependable people collapse inward. Nicole, by contrast, has a talent for over-exacerbating a situation until it becomes unrecognizable. In that landscape, Danny's value becomes unexpectedly clear. Silly and over the top, yes, occasionally peace, occasionally chaos, but sometimes the best support is the person who can distract, cheer, and keep someone from being treated like a memorial while they are still standing. The episode quietly argues that comfort does not always come in the most polished package. The holiday framing also invites a broader note of solidarity. Seasonal celebration looks different for everyone, and real life carries weight that soap storylines can only imitate. The underlying message is simple and necessary. People should stick together, especially when the holidays are hard. Finally, amid the episode's festive theatrics, a sobering acknowledgement cuts through. Recognition and respect for those who are facing, have faced, or will face a diagnosis of triple-negative breast cancer, and for those lost to it. The gratitude extends to the painful truth that progress, treatments, research, the hope of better outcomes and a future cure, has been bought at a cost paid by real people. That tribute sits in stark contrast to the episode's manufactured suspicions and scripted revelations, serving as a reminder that some battles are not plot devices. They are lived, and they deserve honor, healing, and sustained attention. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The real villain isn't Leslie. It's the grown adults who keep handing her the microphone. This episode performs an impressive feat. It makes Nicole's profession as a psychiatrist feel like an elaborate rumor, one she accepted without verifying naturally. The hour is essentially a masterclass in how educated adults can abandon evidence, logic, and basic dignity the moment Leslie clears her throat. And because this is a soap, the holiday setting is merely decorative. Christmas cheer exists only to highlight how aggressively everyone chooses chaos. Nicole, in particular, is determined to speed-run bad judgment. The moment a vague allegation floats in the air, conclusions are drawn with the confidence of someone holding absolutely no concrete proof. The result is predictable: misplaced suspicion, public shade, and the sort of reckless escalation that threatens to blow up an entire Christmas gathering for sport. If Ted once partnered with Nicole, the resemblance is now undeniable. Naivety recognizes naivety, and it forms alliances. Meanwhile, Leslie continues her career as a walking hazard. Arriving with props like mistletoe for a hotel room visit is not romance. It is sabotage with seasonal packaging. Even the simplest safeguards, such as using a peephole before opening the door, are treated as optional, which explains why Ted keeps letting trouble stroll in as if it has a reservation. The obsession is also no longer subtle. Leslie is inserted into every scene like a plot device with a pulse, and the writing expects it to read as tension rather than repetition. Ted, however, remains the true architect of this mess, passing along a rumor sourced from the very person who detonated his marriage without verification does not suggest concern. It suggests a man committed to rebuilding credibility by actively throwing it away. The more he reacts to Leslie, the more he validates her access, her influence, and her ability to keep the entire family emotionally hostage. At this point, the issue is not merely that Ted made mistakes, it is that he refuses to shut the door he insists is closed. And then there is the family ecosystem enabling all of it. The Duprees and Richardsons continue to treat Dana, Leslie as reliable narrators, which is a fascinating choice for people supposedly invested in truth. The automatic belief, the instant outrage, the refusal to apply even a whisper of skepticism, this is less family unity and more group susceptibility. Watching them accept accusations about one another so easily makes the dysfunction feel less dramatic and more procedural. The Sharon-Vernon-Anita triangle is another example of misplaced focus. If Ted's claims about cheating are so dubious, the immediate impulse to throw shade at Sharon is not moral vigilance, it is performance. And yet, the episode still manages to plant the paranoia effectively. Nicole's not-so-subtle shading on Christmas Eve is the kind of timing that deserves an award for strategic insensitivity. The suspense about whether Sharon's conflicts with Danny will surface only heightens the sense that no relationship can simply exist without an incoming scandal scheduled to arrive on cue. To the credit of the show, it does offer brief relief in moments where the characters behave like humans rather than plot puppets. Vernon's line, "I can't fight your fight, but I'm in your corner," lands because it sounds like support instead of manipulation. The scenes of the Duprees coming together also work, when the writing remembers that warmth can coexist with drama instead of being sacrificed to it. And yes, the aesthetics deserve their applause. Anita'S ensemble, Leslie's jacket, and the wardrobe department's consistent excellence are doing more to maintain stability than several characters combined. When clothing becomes the most reliable element of an episode, that is not merely fashion, it is narrative triage. Unfortunately, even a sentimental holiday episode cannot resist sabotage from within. If the goal was to preserve emotion, certain characters arrive like professionals in ruining it. Chelsea, Kat, and Naomi managed to sour the tone with remarkable efficiency. The French dialogue, meanwhile, is deployed with the confidence of someone who has never met the language but feels spiritually aligned with it. La Belle Chateau is the kind of phrase that announces, loudly, that accuracy was not invited into the writer's room. The clearest takeaway is this: Leslie did not simply show up to stir trouble. The entire premise hinges on a deliberate attempt to destabilize Ted's life, and it succeeds because Ted keeps handing her the tools. He can have a relationship with his daughter without entertaining her mother's theatrics, yet he insists on leaving the door open, emotionally, socially, and narratively. That ongoing indulgence is exactly why Kat cannot move past the damage, and why the family remains trapped in the same cycle. The solution is not complicated. It is merely inconvenient for a man who prefers ambiguity. Ted has to shut Leslie down permanently. No access, no influence, no "let me explain," no ongoing stage time. He also has to stop playing daughters against each other. Undermining one to appease another is not parenting. It is cowardice dressed as conflict management. Until he does those things, the dysfunction will continue, the rumors will keep landing like facts, and Nicole will keep demonstrating that credentials are not the same thing as judgment. So yes, things are heating up, Danny's arrival threatens combustion, and the Christmas spot is one accusation away from becoming a crime scene. The only real pressure isn't on the gifts, it's on the adults to act like adults. The episode makes it clear they are not ready. Everyone keeps calling Beyond the Gates so good. Fine, but it's not great, and the show keeps proving it every time it confuses a rumor with a plot. Beyond the Gates is a good soap opera, not a great one, the kind of good that shows promise, flirts with depth, and then occasionally trips over its own need to manufacture chaos at maximum volume. The trajectory is encouraging, but the execution still has that familiar daytime habit of confusing momentum with maturity. And then there is the emotional centerpiece currently doing the heavy lifting: Anita and Vernon. The show has landed on a storyline that is painful, intimate, and disarmingly effective. Two people who have built a life so intertwined that the idea of one surviving the other feels less like melodrama and more like a quiet existential threat. The illness arc has been written with enough specificity to feel real, which is precisely why it hits. It also explains the audience's insistence that this cannot end in a tidy, write-her-out convenience. A character like Anita does not exist to be removed. She exists to anchor the emotional credibility of the world. Of course, in classic soap fashion, that credibility must coexist with the show's compulsive need to toss gasoline on every room it enters. So while Anita's condition begs for tenderness, the plot insists on adding suspicion, gossip, and frantic math performed by adults who should know better. The Vernon cheating rumor is the perfect example. A rumor so flimsy it practically arrives with a gift receipt, yet it ricochets through the cast as if it were sworn testimony. The likely truth, that Vernon is not cheating but preparing something sentimental, including singing lessons and a performance, feels both predictable and necessary. Vernon's devotion is not subtle. It has been signposted with the kind of earnestness that makes infidelity feel not only out of character, but narratively lazy. The real spectacle is not the rumor. It is Ted. Ted sprinting to Nicole with second-hand intel sourced from Leslie. Leslie, whose motivations are not complicated so much as aggressively obvious. The question is not why Leslie would plant a story. The question is why Ted continues to treat her claims like breaking news instead of what they are, bait. The man has the discernment of a wind chime in a hurricane. If there is a simple solution, verify, fact-check, run a test, ask a direct question. Ted reliably chooses the most cumbersome, dramatic route available. He does not walk next door. He circumnavigates the globe to reach the mailbox. Then Nicole, apparently allergic to restraint, takes that same dog-with-a-bone energy and trots the rumor straight to Danny. This is the point where the show veers from heightened to self-sabotaging. Nicole can notice odd behavior. That is observation. Nicole can ask questions. That is concern. But leaping from a handful of clues to 99 reasons to jump to conclusions is not intelligence. It is impatience dressed as certainty. If Anita'S health is fragile, the last thing the household needs is a chorus of privileged panic, turning every unexplained detail into a conspiracy. Still, this mess will pay off. Because it has to. When the truth comes out, Vernon wasn't sneaking around with a lover, he was preparing a gift and a performance. The fallout writes itself. Nicole will be furious, and rightly so. Ted brought her a rumor he should have kept to himself, especially when it came from a source designed to destabilize. Ted will look foolish. The Duprees will notice. The country club crowd will inevitably treat humiliation like a community sport. And Leslie's attempt at manipulation will backfire with the elegance of a poorly thrown vase. Speaking of Leslie, the show's moral clarity is oddly strongest when it stops pretending certain characters deserve infinite grace. Forgiveness is not amnesia, and Leslie is not a misunderstood free spirit. Attempted murder is not an oops, and the idea that her past should be politely overlooked is a luxury reserved for people who have never been on the receiving end of her chaos. Kat's refusal to let it go is not stubbornness, it is sanity. A daughter knowing exactly what her mother is capable of does not create a duty to pretend otherwise. The series also can't resist its favorite pastime, dangling paternity and identity theories like shiny objects. Whispers about Lynette possibly being Isaiah's ex, Yolanda. Speculation that Eva could be Nicole's daughter. The deliciously catastrophic possibility that Kat could be Leslie's daughter. A genetic explanation for their mirrored volatility. These are the sorts of hooks soaps live on. The best part is not the answer. It is the social earthquake the answer would trigger. If Kat and Leslie were revealed as mother and daughter, it would reframe years of conflict into a single brutal sentence. The chaos was hereditary. And then there is the show's occasional confusion about romance versus repetition. Danny and Andre may have chemistry, but the writing has grown oddly one note. Bed, heading to bed, discussing bed, circling bed, returning to bed. A relationship cannot survive as a rotating door to the same room. Even in a soap, intimacy requires variation. Tenderness, conflict, humor, ambition, vulnerability. When 90% of shared screen time is sexual prelude or sexual aftermath, it stops being passionate and starts being lazy. The timing choice, airing a particularly painful chapter on Christmas Eve, also deserves scrutiny. Holiday episodes are often engineered to maximize sentimentality, but there is a difference between emotional storytelling and emotional ambush. The show clearly wanted tears, and it got them. The question is whether the tears served the narrative or the calendar. When a series is still getting there, leaning on holiday grief can feel less like confidence and more like strategy. Underneath the sarcasm, the core truth remains. The audience is invested. Not passively entertained, invested. The enthusiasm for anniversaries, the insistence that the show belongs in awards conversations, the communal rituals around tuning in with tissues and coffee, even the irritation at people policing emotional reactions. These are signs of a soap doing what soaps are built to do, making viewers feel implicated. The irony, of course, is that the same people who insist it is only a soap often behave as though it is a binding contract. The genre doesn't ask for detachment, it rewards devotion. So yes, Beyond the Gates is good. Not great. Not yet. But it has the bones of something sharper, especially when it trusts its strongest relationships, stops treating rumors as plot, and remembers that drama is not the same thing as noise. Still defending Ted like he's a misunderstood hero? This breakdown is for anyone tired of rewarding incompetence with endless second chances. Danny's casual name drop of a children's book should have been a harmless nostalgia moment. Instead, it lands like an accidental grenade. The author is a real person from the same university circle in 1975, which naturally invites the obvious conclusion that this is not a coincidence so much as a breadcrumb trail. The implication is clear. There is likely an off-screen relationship there, because reality television rarely randomly stumbles into that kind of specificity without enjoying the chaos it can later monetize. And chaos, to be fair, is the show's favorite supporting character. Ted, meanwhile, continues his long-running commitment to being the least trustworthy man in any room, including rooms he owns. The pattern is exhausting in its consistency. He moves at lightning speed when it involves broadcasting someone else's business, yet requires decades to show a similar urgency about his own truth. 10 seconds to sprint toward gossip, 20 years to locate a conscience. Efficiency, just pointed in the wrong direction. The larger issue is not simply that Ted is messy. It is that he is selectively principled, petty enough to knock the Duprees off their pedestals, yet not thoughtful enough to verify anything before treating it as gospel. He accepts information from proven liars with the confidence of a man who has never been penalized for being wrong, then repackages it as fact, because accountability has apparently never been part of his storyline. Of course, the same Ted who extends instant credibility to Leslie, an established manipulator, managed to withhold patience and trust from his own daughter. That contrast is not subtle. It is a character indictment. The cat situation, in particular, is where the writing and the behavior intersect in an especially irritating way. No apology should ever be required for attending a family function that someone was invited to attend. If the goal is togetherness, then togetherness does not come with conditions, guilt, or a public shaming ceremony. When asked why she came independently, a simple answer would have sufficed. Instead, Kat's name becomes a convenient shield for someone else's discomfort, as if the real threat is not the family dysfunction, but the presence of someone refusing to perform for it. Even better, Kat does what competent adults do. She shows up, speaks plainly, answers questions without theatrical defensiveness, and refrains from humiliating anyone merely for existing. The result is predictable. When someone behaves normally, the frauds tend to reveal themselves without much help. It is a quiet kind of competence, and it makes the surrounding characters look even more ridiculous. And then there is Leslie, who now appears to be receiving cheek kiss farewells as if attempted murder and lies are minor personality quirks. The show asks for emotional amnesia, while also insisting the audience should remain emotionally invested. That is not tension, it is contradiction. Leslie and Eva are especially hard to take seriously as anything resembling redeemable when one nearly killed Laura twice, and the other helped cover it up. A storyline cannot demand moral clarity from certain characters while rewarding others for escalating violence and calling it drama. That is not complexity. It is selective memory dressed as plot. Nicole, Shanice, and the Duprees are positioned as people with standards, dignity, and actual moral stakes, which immediately raises the question of why Ted is still allowed within conversational distance. The most sensible conclusion is that Ted belongs exactly where his behavior keeps dragging him, attached to the chaos he refuses to resist, orbiting Leslie and Eva like a satellite powered entirely by poor judgment. If those are the choices he keeps making, then the solution is simple. He should stay there and stop contaminating everyone else's storyline. As for Ted's depiction overall, the choice to dumb him down into a naive, gullible errand boy is not character development. It is character sabotage. Either he is calculating enough to be petty and strategic, or he is clueless enough to swallow lies without question. The current version tries to be both, and the result is a man who looks foolish in every scene, especially when delivering information with the smug certainty of someone who never paused to confirm it. Meanwhile, the show's spoiler culture is treated like an unwanted third wheel, because suspense is the point. Anticipation is part of the experience, and premature reveals drain the narrative of its one reliable asset: surprise. When every twist arrives pre-announced, the viewing experience becomes less story and more checklist. On the Dupree side, Vernon remains the rare character who inspires genuine investment, at least until the inevitable betrayal alarm starts ringing. The affection he shows his wife reads as sincere, emotionally grounded, and disarmingly human. His anguish, especially around Anita'S fatal cancer, carries weight because it is not performed like a stunt. It is the kind of sorrow that should not be used as seasonal decoration or a holiday-destroying plot device. Yet the show seems determined to test how much tragedy one family can absorb before the audience starts negotiating for mercy. And then the insinuation arrives, quietly but unmistakably: Vernon is likely cheating. The framing is not subtle. The intensity of Nicole's reaction is positioned like narrative groundwork rather than character realism. The timing of the reveal is anyone's guess, but the trajectory is clear. The collapse will be engineered to create a future reconnection between Nicole and Ted. Because nothing says romantic reconciliation like mutual devastation and conveniently timed disappointment. Elsewhere, Vanessa continues the timeless tradition of waiting until the worst possible moment to be honest. After loudly wanting everyone to acknowledge her relationship with Joey, the failure to come clean to her son lands as less complicated and more strategically evasive. There is no mystery in it, just avoidance with better lighting. Haley, predictably, remains a cockroach in narrative terms, impossible to get rid of and increasingly central because the writers refuse to let her exit. The political subplot reads like a deliberate preservation tactic, Joey floating the idea of Bill running for office not because it makes organic sense, but because it keeps Haley relevant. If poisoning Bill no longer serves her interests, the possibility of prestige certainly will. The allure of becoming a first lady is exactly the kind of ambition that could redirect her chaos into a shinier, more socially acceptable brand of manipulation. Randy, also known as Cuz, appears positioned for betrayal, with Haley likely turning against him when it becomes convenient. Loyalty is rarely stable currency in this cast. It is a temporary accessory. Questions remain that the narrative clearly intends to weaponize later. The identity of Dana's father, for one, is being dangled with the confidence of a show that knows it will eventually need a paternity reveal to revive momentum. And on the legal front, the adoption issue is not trivial. If Samantha and Tyrell are to be legally adopted, parental rights typically must be terminated or relinquished by the legal parents, unless a court finds grounds to terminate those rights. In other words, legally adopted generally requires more than good intentions and heartfelt speeches. Then there is Carlton, who radiates suspicion with such consistency that it feels less like paranoia and more like pattern recognition. He has long wanted Nicole, and his interactions with Leslie read as familiar in the way that people are when they share history or a plan. The theory practically writes itself: Carlton as Eva's father, with Carlton and Leslie coordinating behind the scenes to destabilize Nicole and funnel her back toward Ted. The fact that Carlton has been Ted's best friend for years, while Leslie's past connections were framed more through Bill, only adds to the sense that something is being withheld. The demeanor is off. The proximity is convenient. The puzzle pieces are being placed with care. And that, ultimately, is where everything lands. Ted has become so aggravating that the most reasonable wish is distance, particularly from Shanice, who deserves far better than a man who treats loyalty like a suggestion and truth like an optional add-on. If Ted must remain on screen, the least the narrative can do is stop pretending he belongs among people who still have standards.